It's not just a belief, it's reality. If you start from zero and try to build wealth, the first $100,000 are usually much harder to reach than the next $100,000. But why is that? In this video, we'll look at these several reasons why. My name's Sean, and here on the channel, I explain different financial products, helpful strategy, and insights that the financial world has to offer. Enjoy! Today, we'll look at why the first $100,000 in wealth building is much more challenging than everything after that. But now, let's dive into the topic. Why are the first $100,000 so difficult? As mentioned, there are a couple of reasons, some of which are mathematical reasons, which we'll look at now. Later, we'll also discuss personal reasons. One of the most important aspects that we humans struggle to imagine or understand is exponential growth. We tend to think linearly. Linear thinking means, for example, that if we save $10,000 each year, we know and can easily imagine that after 10 years, we'll have $100,000. Investing, however, is quite different, and it follows an exponential function. Let's start with two examples that illustrate why exponential thinking is so unintuitive. First example, how many times do you think you need to fold a piece of paper for it to be tall enough to reach the moon? A piece of paper is pretty thin, right? If we fold it once, it doubles in thickness. If we then fold it again, it's 4 times as thick as an ordinary sheet of paper. Fold it again, and it's 8 times as thick, and so on. We see that each fold doubles the paper's height. Of course, there's a natural limit. At some point, the paper can no longer be folded, but if that limit didn't exist, then folding it just 42 times would be enough to reach from the Earth to the moon. There's a second well-known example that demonstrates exponential growth. The Indian king Shriram wanted to reward the inventor of chess and asked how he could do so. The inventor used a chessboard and asked to place only 1 grain of rice on the first square and have the amount double on each successive square of the board. At first, this seems like very little, but by the 15th square, there would already be a 500-gram package of rice. By the 28th square, it would weigh as much as an elephant, and by the 44th square, it could fill an entire oil tanker. And remember, a chessboard has 64 squares. Now, how does this apply to money? Let's assume we invest €1, and this doubles itself each year. The graph would look something like this. At first, not much happens, but then exponential growth kicks in and it rises very quickly. Now, doubling money each year is pretty unrealistic as it would require a 100% annual return, so that's why this example is only for illustration purposes. But with lower growth rates like the 9% we can achieve in the stock market, the curve looks the same, though stretched over a longer period. This growth, exemplified here with 100%, is due to compound interest, the growth year after year. Now, let's look at this with $100,000. How quickly can we reach this $100,000? Let's first do this without additional savings. We'll simply invest $10,000 at an average annual return of 9%. For simplicity, let's ignore taxes. In this scenario, it would take 27 years to reach the first $100,000. But if we leave this money invested so it can keep compounding, we'll reach the next $100,000 a lot faster. Here we don't have to wait another 27 years, but just 8 years. The next $100,000, so the $300,000 level, will reach even faster at a speed of just 5 years, then 3 years, and so on. So here we've got the purely mathematical explanation of why reaching the first $100,000 is so hard. This principle also applies to all other amounts, so the first $10,000 is harder to reach than the next $10,000, and the same goes for the first million. The same holds true if we calculate all this again, but with a savings rate. So not just starting with $10,000, but in addition to the $10,000 of starting capital, we save an additional $10,000 each year. Both the starting capital and additional saved capital would both together be invested at 9% per year. But an important note, this 9% is a long-term theoretical average. Here, investments in the stock market are subject to significant fluctuations, resulting in the so-called sequence of returns risk. We'll cover this topic in another video, but for simplicity, let's stick with this average of 9%. With this strategy, you'd reach your first $100,000 in 7 years. And also, we can see here that the next $100,000 keep coming at shorter and shorter intervals. So looking at this early on, what we earn from the stock market, so the interest or returns, make only a very small impact and your wealth grows mainly through saving. Then, years later, the wealth building starts to pick up speed when compound interest kicks in, generating additional returns based on our accumulated previous earnings. This acts as our booster and accelerates our wealth building exponentially to grow like in the shape of a hockey stick. In this scenario, you'd reach your first million after 26 years. So now we saw that the first $100,000 is harder to reach because initially the growth appears nearly linear, almost flat. Why? The reason for this is at the beginning, you have very little wealth in your account. So any interest or stock market returns are based on a small amount. In real life, we'll also expect that at the beginning of your wealth building journey, you might also have a lower income and still a relatively low savings rate. And at the start, you'll need to get used to stock market fluctuations and therefore might be hesitant or inconsistent with your investing. But don't conclude from this the wrong idea that you should start saving late because the curve is flat at first anyways, and you think you will earn more later and can catch up on what you missed. This strategy, in my opinion, isn't a good idea. It's very worth it, even at the beginning when you don't really have much money coming in, to start setting something aside. Firstly, this will start slowly growing your base and have you slowly adopting the right mindset, namely putting money aside and investing it so you let your money start working for you. Now, another right mindset that'll help you make sure that you have your money working for you is to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's discuss the factors that will help you gain that exponential boost later. First, something which I already mentioned before is having that experience in the stock market will make you more confident in your investing habit, and this will very likely lead to you making fewer mistakes that will cost you money. For example, you'll start to pay attention on minimizing costs as everything you're paying out in expenses will reduce returns. And you'll start to follow basic principles like diversification, for example. Also, over time, you'll overcome some of the most common fears. A classic one I see all the time is that many new investors who have saved their first few $1,000s aren't very comfortable dealing with taxes. But after 1 or 2 years of investing and tax filings, you'll find that investing and taxes aren't that complex at all, especially since your broker actually does most of the work for you. Now, another point I still want to talk about as we come to the end of the video is that as your wealth grows, new options open up for you. Early on, your investment choices might be limited to ETFs and stocks, since there's no real barrier to entry here like a large minimum investment amount, and you can already start with small amounts. But with more money, you've got more options to invest in other asset class types so you can keep diversifying and maybe get returns that are better than what you'd find in the stock market. For example, if you're an expert in a certain field and a friend or colleague of yours wants to start a company, you might get the chance to invest in them and get strong returns. This of course has a much higher level of risk, but since you have a pretty large cushion of capital, you won't be investing your entire wealth in it, but just a small piece of it. So if that money is then lost, you're not thrown back to the starting line. But if the investment works out better than expected, it could be that you generate much higher returns with this investment portion than just our 9%. The situation is similar in the real estate asset class, for example. In order to be successful here, you generally need a good chunk of starting capital, or at least partners who have this capital available. So the closer you get to $100,000, the more options open up for you. For example, it makes a big difference whether you have a financial cushion if you're faced with the decision to start your own company because you have a groundbreaking idea or some opportunity opens up for you. So if you have more money, you also have more options, and this usually also accelerates wealth creation. Now, just an important note to make here, these are very generalized statements. There are of course also cases where the second $100,000 are much more difficult to achieve than the first $100,000. For example, because the first $100,000 was achieved during a good market phase, and then the stock market takes a dip right after. But these examples are just illustrative. But the bottom line is this. Yes, the first $100,000 or any other milestones in your wealth accumulation journey are generally more difficult to achieve than anything after that. Of course, this has a lot to do with your personal development. You won't be earning as much money at the beginning, so you won't be able to save and invest as much. But we've also got very clear mathematical reasons why this is the case. Because especially at the beginning, when you realize profits, for example, 9%, which we just calculated with, you do not yet have enough leverage with small assets to achieve really large capital gains earnings. For example, if you have $1,000 in your portfolio and make a 5% return, you'll have earned just $50. You could have earned this $50 much faster in a part-time job. But if your assets have already grown to $20,000, then a 5% return is already $1,000. That's a very different order of magnitude. For this reason, it's worth starting earlier, getting used to saving early, investing early, no matter how small the amount, and then starting to build up your wealth, gaining experience, and seeing that you can increase your savings rate and thus boost your wealth accumulation. The whole thing in the end is an exercise in patience, so be patient. If you have any questions or thoughts, post them in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, then you might want to check out this other video over here, which explains one of the best investing assets for beginners to use the compound interest effect for their journey, which I also have linked in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.